students, we co-create success criteria, beginning with the end in mind. This way, students are able to articulate the language of assessment and to know the targets that they are aiming for. In my classroom, we have created our learning intentions and success criteria that are posted. The learning intentions and success criteria are in student-friendly language. At all times, students know the target that they are aiming for. By having the success criteria posted, it is a visual reminder to students of the goal that they are aiming for. Students also have a student assessment checklist. They use this checklist to determine whether or not they've achieved the target. Students first self-assess their work and then conference with a critical friend. After they have gone through that process, students conference with a teacher, myself, where I am able to give students meaningful feedback based on the success criteria. Once students have had multiple formative tasks, depending on how many they need to achieve that success, the students' work is then evaluated with a rubric. The rubric reflects the success criteria, so it is always the same assessment that is used to determine whether the student has achieved success. Thinking about the gradual release of responsibility and how to scaffold the students to be successful in their learning, at the very beginning part of any new unit or learning, many opportunities are given for modeled and shared lessons. So for example, in my classroom, I leave the modeled and shared lessons on anchor charts posted throughout the room. This way, students' thinking is anchored on the chart paper, and students often refer to this chart paper, these anchor charts, to determine whether or not they're on track with their learning and to remind them of what the process is and what we've learned in the classroom. And it supports their thinking and aligns with what I'm teaching right now in my classroom. To support students in their reading comprehension, I also have various mentor texts that are left up on the whiteboard. Leaving these books up on the board is also important because students are able to make intertextual connections and think about the big ideas within those texts. After every read aloud, we discuss in think, pair, share, in small groups, whole class, written responses, oral responses about some of the things that we've learned from these books, always going back to the big idea so that we're promoting those metacognitive skills so that students are thinking about their thinking about the purpose, the author's purpose for writing those books, and thinking beyond literal connections. In any given reading response, I'm often looking for an organized response that says the part in the text when, this reminds me of, my connection helps me understand, the big idea is. So in the primary grades, those prompts are often needed to be able to support students in organizing their thoughts. And thinking about scaffolding the learning and having meaningful anchor charts posted in the classroom. Everything that we do is part of the writing process as well, given any unit that we're working on. For term one, it was descriptive paragraphs. And what we've done is to honor every stage of that writing process. I've kept the anchor charts posted to show students that it's very important that we go through each step of the writing process. When students see that I value every step of the process, they begin to understand how important it is that they too go through the entire writing process, be it pre-writing, organizing, drafting, editing, revising, and then publishing. My anchor charts that I have posted have been co-created with my students. Given that my classroom is a primary classroom, not only do I use a lot of anchor charts and a lot of modeled and shared lessons, but when I'm developing my anchor charts, what I do is that I use the use of color to differentiate the different parts of a paragraph, for example, that I'm looking for. Guided writing and one-to-one conferencing. I use the same formula with helping my students understand that a paragraph needs to have certain parts. And again, I've included the use of color to show them where the topic sentence is, detail sentences, and a concluding sentence. This way students can see that even in a paragraph or a 5-paragraph essay, that it needs to have, every part needs to be there for the student to be successful. And once again, students use various checklists to make sure that they've gone through the entire writing process. Students also use the success criteria, which has been co-created to help them edit and revise, and as well as conference with a critical friend. And then once they're ready to have a teacher conference with myself, I'm able to give them meaningful formative feedback, again, based on that same success criteria. And that students can see that the criteria and the expectation doesn't change. That for them to be successful, they just need to stay on track and be reflective and apply the feedback they've been given from myself or their peers, so that they're able to move along in the learning process. The success criteria should never be a moving target. It needs to be something that students can understand and aim for. All pieces of students' work is valued in my classroom, and especially when thinking about using a process portfolio, all evidence is stapled together and put into their portfolio. So this over here is a perfect example of that process. The student, for example, has completed a graphic organizer, a draft. They've had peer conference and a teacher conference, and has attempted a published draft, and later on has finally gone into publishing. So all of these pieces have been stapled together and put into the student's portfolio. At the end of the process, the student completes a reflective piece, and in the primary classroom we use 3 stars and a wish, where students articulate 3 things that they are proud about in their work, and 1 wish that they have to improve for next time. And once again, this has been a formative piece. There's been no evaluative mark assigned to it, but the students can begin to understand that every step that they do is valued and is part of the learning process. Since September, students have been storing their independent reading, their writer's notebook, their portfolio, their working portfolio, as well as reading response in their browsing boxes, which I keep at the front of the classroom and are accessible to students at all times. Each browsing box contains the student's portfolio, where they house their published work, and contains their published writing, math tests, and some reading responses. We also have a working portfolio where students are collecting samples of work that they are working on during the formative stage. And finally, in the browsing box, we also have their reading response binder, where collections and evidence of students' work has been collected since September with respect to reading response and the strategies that they've learned throughout the year. Students also have their writer's notebook, which is housed in their browsing box. And what this is an opportunity for students to practice independently authentic writing. So students are not so much writing from prompts, but they're writing from lists which they've generated on topics of interest to them. Also in their browsing box, students have various books that they're reading for the week, and students are allowed to change the books in their browsing box once a week. Usually they have about 4 or 5 books stored in there. And finally, for when we're doing group work on the floor and responding, students have a clipboard. And again, having everything compiled together in a browsing box on the floor really makes things accessible and organized for students to find what they're looking for in an efficient manner. So basically, all of the examples that you see in my classroom, from the anchor charts that were co-created with students, to the various modeled and shared anchor charts that were also created with students, to their published work, is really an example of the print-rich environment that I encourage in my classroom, so that students are able to see what success looks like and understand the process that they need to go through to achieve that success.